From the time Anna Whitaker was a little girl, she had imagined what her wedding day would look like. In her mind, there was always a soft golden glow over the horizon, a dress that made her feel both beautiful and strong, and a man who would look at her as though she was his entire world. Now, as the date drew near, those dreams seemed closer than ever. The Willow Crest Estate in Riverton, Ohio, stood ready to host the most important day of her life. The hall smelled faintly of polished oak and roses, the chandeliers sparkled like falling stars, and Anna found herself drifting between wonder and disbelief that this was all truly happening. Her fiancé, Jonathan Hale, had come from a world that felt distant from her own. His family name carried weight in the city, a name tied to law firms, business deals, and polished reputations. Jonathan himself, though raised among privilege, had always struck her as different from his parents. Where they carried themselves with a cold formality, he seemed warmer, lighter, the kind of man who could make her laugh even when the world pressed down on her shoulders. It was that warmth, more than anything else, that convinced her she had found her partner for life. In the days leading up to the ceremony, Anna moved through a haze of fittings, floral arrangements, and rehearsals. Friends teased her about how calm she seemed, but beneath her measured smile, a current of nerves tugged at her. Was she ready for this? Marriage was more than a promise of love. It was the joining of two families, two histories, two entirely different ways of viewing the world. She reminded herself that love was strong enough to bridge those divides, that Jonathan would stand beside her no matter what storms might come. Late in the evening, she often sat by her bedroom window, looking out at the lights scattered across Riverton like fallen embers. She thought of her late grandfather, Walter Whitaker, the man who had raised her to value dignity over wealth and courage over comfort. He would have been proud to see her now, preparing to take this step. Anna carried his lessons like an invisible shield, though she had no way of knowing just how much she would need them in the days ahead. For now, though, she allowed herself to believe in the beauty of it all. The dress, the music, the laughter she imagined echoing through the estate. She thought she was on the cusp of the happiest chapter of her life. What she didn't realize was that in just 3 days, everything she thought she knew about Jonathan's family, and even Jonathan himself, would be shaken. The dreams of a perfect wedding would collide with a harsh ultimatum, and Anna would be forced to decide whether her future would be built on submission or on strength. The Hales were a family people in Riverton spoke of with both admiration and quiet caution. Their reputation reached beyond their law practice, touching every corner of the city's business and social life. Edward Hale, Jonathan's father, carried himself like a man accustomed to being obeyed. His voice was never raised, but it had the sharpness of steel. Margaret, his wife, had a different kind of authority, a polished elegance that could cut just as deeply as any word. She moved through rooms as though she owned them, her smile practiced, her silence often louder than her speech. Anna had met them many times since she and Jonathan became engaged, but despite the polite conversations and strained dinners, she never felt at ease in their presence. They looked at her as though she were a guest at their table, never truly part of their circle. Jonathan often brushed it off, saying, "That's just how they are. Don't take it personally." Still, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that she was being measured, weighed, and silently judged. On the surface, Jonathan seemed unlike them. He laughed easily, he listened when she spoke, and he treated her with a gentleness that stood in contrast to the rigid way his parents moved through the world. Yet Anna sometimes wondered how much of their influence lingered in him. He was proud of his family name, careful to defend them if she ever voiced her unease. She tried to tell herself that love would eventually soften the distance between her and the Hales, that time and patience would melt their frosty exterior. Still, little signs had begun to trouble her. The way Edward spoke about protecting the family legacy, the way Margaret's eyes lingered on her ring finger during dinners, as if the diamond Jonathan gave her was less about love and more about proof of possession. Once Margaret had remarked with a thin smile, "A marriage isn't just about two people, Anna. It's about protecting what families have built. At the time, Anna brushed it off, thinking it was just the kind of lofty sentiment wealthy families like to repeat. But late at night, when Jonathan was asleep beside her, Anna would lie awake, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't help but wonder if those words carried more weight than she wanted to admit. Jonathan reassured her constantly. He spoke of their future, of building a home together, away from the shadows of his parents' influence. And Anna clung to that promise. After all, she was marrying him, not his parents. She reminded herself of that each time Margaret's cool smile or Edward's piercing stare unsettled her. Yet somewhere in her chest, unease had already begun to take root. She didn't know it yet, but the true measure of the Hale family's grip would soon be revealed. The polished charm, the elegant dinners, the poised conversation, all of it was merely a curtain. And behind that curtain, a test was waiting for her, one that would decide the course of her marriage before it even began. 3 days before the wedding, Anna received a call from Margaret Hale. Her voice was as smooth as glass, each word clipped and measured. "Anna, we'd like you to stop by the house this afternoon. There are a few matters we need to settle before Saturday." It sounded polite enough, but something in the tone left Anna uneasy. Still, she agreed. She told herself it was probably about last-minute details, maybe seating arrangements or a family tradition they wanted her to acknowledge. She dressed neatly but simply, choosing not to appear flustered, and drove across town to the Hale residence. The house was more like a monument than a home. Tall columns, dark stone, and windows that seemed to look down on the world with disdain. When Anna stepped inside, she was greeted not with warmth, but with silence. Margaret sat in the drawing room, her posture flawless, while Edward stood near the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel as though he were presiding over a courtroom. On the coffee table between them lay a neat stack of papers, bound together in a leather folder. "Please," Edward said, motioning toward the sofa. His voice was calm, but there was no kindness in it. Anna sat, folding her hands in her lap. Margaret opened the folder and slid the papers toward her. "This is a standard agreement," she said smoothly. "It will only take a moment of your time. We'll need your signature before the wedding proceeds." Anna picked up the top sheet, scanning the lines. Her chest tightened as she realized what she was holding. A prenuptial agreement, harsh, unforgiving, written entirely in the Hale's favor. It stripped her of any claim to property, finances, or security should the marriage ever dissolve. In plain terms, if she married Jonathan and things fell apart, she would walk away with nothing. Her heart pounded. She glanced up, searching for Jonathan, but he wasn't there. Only Margaret's steady gaze and Edward's firm stance. I wasn't expecting this," Anna said softly. Edward's expression did not change. "It is customary in our family. Protection of assets, protection of reputation. You understand, of course," Margaret added with a faint smile. "It's not personal, dear. Simply business. If you truly love Jonathan, this shouldn't be an issue." The word stung, delivered with surgical precision. Anna felt a wave of heat rush through her. It wasn't just about paper and ink. It was about control, about being reminded she was an outsider. She steadied her voice. "And if I choose not to sign?" Edward's hand tightened slightly on the mantel. His answer was simple, final. "Then there will be no wedding." The silence that followed was heavy. Anna could hear her own pulse in her ears, could feel the weight of their eyes pressing down on her. She thought of Jonathan, of the vows they were meant to exchange in just 3 days, of the life she had been building in her mind. In that moment, a single truth crystallized inside her. The Hales were not asking, they were demanding, and the choice before her would change everything. That night, Anna sat on the edge of her bed, the leather folder still clutched in her hands. The words blurred before her eyes, no matter how many times she read them. It wasn't just the clauses and signatures. It was the coldness behind them, the certainty that she was expected to submit without question. When Jonathan finally came through the door, his tie loosened and his expression weary, Anna felt the anger she had been holding back all evening flare into life. "You knew about this," she said quietly, not as a question but as an accusation. Jonathan froze, his jacket half off. "What are you talking about?" She held up the folder, her voice trembling with both fury and hurt. "Your parents. They gave me this today. A prenup. They told me to sign it or there won't be a wedding." For a moment, he said nothing. His shoulders sagged as though the weight of her words were stones pressing down on him. "Anna, I was going to talk to you about it. I didn't want to ruin these last few days before the wedding." Her heart twisted. "Ruin them? Jonathan, they ambushed me. They humiliated me. And you weren't even there." He set his jacket aside, running a hand through his hair. "It's just something they expect. Every Hale signs one. It's tradition. It doesn't mean I don't love you." Anna rose to her feet, her voice sharper now. "Tradition? Jonathan, this isn't about tradition. This is about control. About your parents making sure I know my place." He reached for her, but she stepped back. The distance between them felt wider than ever. "Do you agree with them?" she asked. "Do you think I should just sign away everything and pretend it's love?" Jonathan's eyes flickered with conflict. "No, I don't. But I didn't know how to stand up to them. They've always had this power over me." Her breath caught, a mixture of sorrow and disappointment flooding her. She wanted to believe in him, wanted to see the man who had promised her laughter and partnership, not the boy still bound by his parents' shadow. "Then you need to decide," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Are you marrying me, Jonathan, or are you marrying their approval?" The room fell silent. He had no answer. Anna turned away, her hands trembling as she set the folder on the nightstand. She could feel tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. In that moment, she understood that love alone would not be enough. If Jonathan couldn't stand beside her now, before vows were spoken, how could she trust him to stand beside her in the years to come? As he sat in silence, head in his hands, Anna felt the sting of betrayal settle deep in her chest. Broken trust, she realized, cut deeper than any legal contract. Morning light crept through the curtains, but Anna had barely slept. The leather folder sat untouched on the nightstand, its presence like a shadow in the room. Jonathan had left, early, muttering something about work, though Anna suspected it was simply an escape from the conversation they weren't ready to finish. She stared at the papers one last time before slipping them into her bag. She couldn't face this battle alone. If the Hales thought she was naive, if they believed she would simply fold under pressure, they were wrong. She needed counsel, someone she could trust, someone who wouldn't be swayed by the Hale family's polished power. That thought led her to Thomas Grant. Thomas had been her grandfather Walter's attorney for decades, and even after Walter's passing, he had remained a steady presence in Anna's life. He was a man of measured words and quiet wisdom, the kind of person who carried truth like a shield. When she arrived at his office downtown, the smell of old books and polished wood greeted her, bringing a sense of calm she desperately needed. "Anna," Thomas said warmly, rising from his desk. His silver hair caught the morning light, and his eyes carried the same kindness she remembered from her childhood. "What brings you here? Shouldn't you be knee-deep in wedding plans?" She managed a strained smile as she handed him the folder. "Not exactly. I need you to look at this." He adjusted his glasses, settling into his chair as he began to read. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the soft turning of pages. The deeper he went, the tighter his brow furrowed. Finally, he set the folder down with a quiet thud. "This," he said, his voice low, "isn't a prenuptial agreement. It's a declaration of ownership. It gives you nothing, Anna. No protection, no security, no fairness. It is without question one of the most lopsided contracts I've ever seen." Anna's throat tightened. Hearing the truth spoken aloud was both painful and strangely liberating. "So I'm not overreacting." "Not at all," Thomas said firmly. They've underestimated you. They believe you'll sign because you want the marriage more than your dignity. But you don't strike me as the kind of woman who surrenders her dignity for anyone." His words settled into her like a steadying hand. She nodded, her resolve hardening. "So what do I do?" Thomas leaned back, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We don't refuse, we counter. Let them see that you're not defenseless, that you're not walking into this blind. We'll draft an agreement that's fair, one that protects both of you." For the first time since the Hales had cornered her, Anna felt a spark of hope. They wanted her to believe she had no choice, but now she understood she did. With Thomas by her side, she wasn't walking into their trap. She was preparing to turn it back on them. When Anna left Thomas Grant's office that afternoon, the world outside seemed sharper, clearer, as though the fog of uncertainty had begun to lift. Yet with clarity came the weight of a secret she had carried for years, one she had never shared with Jonathan or his family. She thought of her grandfather, Walter Whitaker, the man who had raised her after her parents passed. Walter had lived a quiet but disciplined life, running a small chain of hardware stores and investing carefully. To outsiders, he appeared comfortable but ordinary. What few realized was that he was also patient, shrewd, and always thinking decades ahead. When he passed away, Anna inherited far more than the modest home and the heirlooms everyone expected. There were investments, real estate holdings, and accounts carefully built over a lifetime. Overnight, Anna became the steward of nearly $7 million. She had added to that with her own efforts. A design business she started in college had quietly blossomed into a profitable company. Between inheritance and earnings, her worth had grown to nearly $9 million. But Anna had kept it hidden. Not out of shame, but out of caution. She had seen how money could change the way people looked at her. Friends who once treated her as an equal began to see her as a resource, a stepping stone, or a prize to be won. So she had learned to keep quiet, to let people underestimate her. It was easier, safer, to let the world believe she was ordinary. Jonathan never pressed her about finances, and she never volunteered details. Their relationship had grown on laughter, on late-night drives, on the kind of affection that seemed untouched by greed. She told herself she wanted him to love her for who she was, not for what she had. And for a long time, she believed that choice protected her. But now, staring down the Hales' ultimatum, she saw her silence in a new light. They believed she was powerless because she had allowed them to believe it. They thought she had no leverage, no wealth of her own, and that assumption had emboldened them to corner her. Thomas's words echoed in her mind. "They've underestimated you." Anna realized he was right. She had spent years hiding her strength, but perhaps it was time to stop. Not to flaunt her fortune, not to throw numbers across a table like weapons, but to stand firmly in the truth of who she was. She wasn't a woman to be stripped bare by a cruel contract. She was a woman who had built and preserved her own foundation long before Jonathan ever came into her life. That evening, she sat alone by her window, the city lights flickering like distant stars. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine revealing her truth. To Jonathan, to his parents, to anyone who dared question her worth. The thought frightened her, but it also stirred something else inside her: power. It wasn't the kind of power the Hales wielded, brittle, controlling, rooted in fear of losing what they had. Hers was quieter, steadier, born of resilience and patience. And if they forced her hand, she was ready to let it be seen. 2 days before the wedding, Anna returned to Thomas Grant's office with a steadiness she hadn't felt in days. The sting of humiliation from Margaret and Edward still lingered, but beneath it ran a current of determination. She wasn't going to crumble. Not now. Thomas greeted her with the same calm presence, a revised agreement already waiting on his desk. "This one protects both parties," he explained, tapping the pages. "It's balanced, fair. If Jonathan truly loves you, he won't object." Anna nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the document. For so long she had avoided confrontation. telling herself silence was easier. Now, silence would cost her everything. "Thomas," she said softly, "I'll need to tell him the truth." He adjusted his glasses. "About your inheritance?" "Yes, about all of it. He deserves to know who he's marrying. And his parents need to understand that I'm not the powerless girl they think I am." Thomas studied her for a moment, then gave a single approving nod. "You're ready." That evening, Anna sat across from Jonathan in their small apartment, the counter-agreement folded neatly in her hands. He looked uneasy, as though bracing for another argument. "Jonathan," she began, her voice steady but not unkind. "I need to tell you something I should have shared long ago." He frowned, leaning forward. "What is it?" She drew in a breath. "When my grandfather passed, he left me more than just memories. He left me his investments, his properties, his life's work. I've also built my own business since college. Together, it's worth nearly $9 million, Jonathan blinked, stunned into silence. For a long moment, he just stared at her, as though trying to decide if this was some kind of test. You've had this all along?" he finally asked. "Yes." Her voice softened. "And I kept it quiet because I wanted you to love me for me, not for a bank account. But now your parents are treating me as though I have nothing, as though I should be grateful to sign away my rights just to be in your family. I won't do it." He dropped his gaze, shame flickering across his features. "I should have stopped them. I should have protected you." Anna placed the counter-agreement on the table between them. "You still can. This protects both of us, Jonathan. It's fair, but you need to decide where you stand." He picked up the document, his hands unsteady. For once, there was no easy smile, no attempt to smooth things over. He was a man caught between the life he had always known and the life he claimed to want with her. Anna held his gaze. "I love you, but I will not marry into chains. If you want me, you marry all of me, my dignity, my worth, my strength. Otherwise, there will be no wedding." The room hung heavy with silence. Jonathan swallowed hard, then finally nodded. "You're right. I'll stand with you for the first time in days." Anna allowed herself a faint smile. The line had been drawn, and now the real battle would begin. The Hale estate had always seemed intimidating, but on that evening, as Anna and Jonathan walked up the stone steps together, it felt less like a home and more like a battlefield. The heavy double doors opened to reveal Margaret waiting in the entryway, her expression cool, her pearls glinting beneath the chandelier. Edward stood further back in the drawing room, posture rigid, as though he had already prepared his verdict. "Jonathan, Anna," Margaret greeted, her voice polite but sharp. "We didn't expect you so soon." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "We need to talk." They followed Margaret into the room, where Edward waited by the fireplace, much as he had the day he'd first presented the contract. The leather folder still sat on the table, as though mocking Anna with its presence. Edward gestured toward it. "I trust you've had time to reconsider." Anna met his eyes, refusing to flinch. "I have. And I won't be signing that document." Margaret arched a brow. "Then perhaps you don't value this marriage as much as we thought." Jonathan stepped forward before Anna could reply. "She values this marriage more than anyone in this room. But she won't be treated like a servant who should be grateful for scraps. We brought a new agreement, one that's fair." He placed Thomas's revised contract on the table. Edward's expression darkened as he flipped through the pages, his lips thinning with each clause. Margaret leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. "This is absurd," Edward said finally. "It gives her rights to property, assets, investments." "As it should," Anna interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "Marriage is a partnership, not a business merger. If you can't understand that, then perhaps you don't value your son's happiness as much as you pretend." Margaret's hand froze on the page. For the first time, she seemed unsettled. "You speak with such confidence, Anna. As though you have something we don't know." Anna held her gaze steadily. "I do. You've treated me like a woman with nothing to offer, someone clinging to Jonathan for a name and a fortune. But the truth is, I am worth more than $9 million. I don't need the Hale fortune. I don't need your approval. What I want is a marriage built on respect." The silence that followed was sharp as glass. Edward's face reddened, his composure cracking. Margaret's lips parted in shock, though no words came. Jonathan slipped his hand into Anna's, his voice steady. "This is the woman I love. If you can't accept that, then we'll walk away. But I will not let you control her, and I will not let you control us." For once, Edward had no immediate reply. The man who had built his life on intimidation was left speechless, his authority undermined in a single evening. Margaret glanced at her husband, uncertainty clouding her eyes. Anna felt her pulse steady, her breath deepen. For the first time, she was no longer the outsider begging for a place at their table. She was their equal. And they knew it. The confrontation at the Hale estate ended not with shouts or slammed doors, but with a silence so heavy it felt like victory. Edward, stone-faced, had finally set the revised agreement back on the table without another word. Margaret, for all her polished composure, could no longer hide the tremor in her hands. They hadn't signed that night, but the shift in power was undeniable. 2 mornings later, Anna received the call. Jonathan had spoken again with his parents, and though Edward's voice had been gruff and Margaret's tone cool, they had agreed. The revised contract would be signed. There would be a wedding. Anna stood by the window of her apartment, phone still in her hand, staring at the city as relief swept through her. She had expected another battle, perhaps even the end of everything she had been planning for months. Instead, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in days: peace. When she told Thomas, he only smiled knowingly. "They realized they couldn't win," he said. "Not against a woman who knows her worth." The final days before the ceremony passed in a blur, but it was a different kind of chaos now. Not the turmoil of betrayal or doubt, but the ordinary rush of final fittings, floral deliveries, and late-night laughter with her maid of honor, Lena Brooks. Jonathan was by her side constantly, his demeanor softened, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. He no longer seemed like a man divided between two loyalties. For the first time, Anna felt he truly belonged to her, not to his parents' shadow. On the morning of the wedding, she slipped on her gown in a quiet room at Willowcrest Estate. The satin fell perfectly, the lace catching the light like frost in early dawn. Around her neck, she wore her grandfather's old pocket watch, refashioned into a delicate locket, a reminder that Walter's wisdom guided her still. Outside, guests gathered beneath strings of lights and the soft rustle of late summer leaves. The estate, once a place of foreboding when she thought of the Hale name, now felt transformed into a stage for her own triumph. Margaret and Edward were there, of course. Their faces remained composed, but their presence was subdued, no longer commanding. Anna caught Margaret's gaze once, just before the ceremony began, and in that fleeting moment, she saw something unexpected: respect. It was begrudging, yes, but real all the same. As Anna prepared to walk down the aisle, she took a deep breath. The battles of the past week had tested her love, her strength, and her resolve. Now, at last, she felt ready, not just to be Jonathan's wife, but to step into a future built on her own terms. The music swelled, the doors opened, and with her head held high, Anna began her walk toward the man waiting for her. The ceremony unfolded in a haze of light and music, vows spoken with steady voices and eyes that did not waver. When Jonathan slipped the ring onto Anna's finger, the weight of the past week seemed to lift from her shoulders. She wasn't walking into this marriage as someone diminished, but as someone who had fought to be seen, to be respected, to be treated as an equal. The reception stretched long into the evening, filled with laughter, dancing, and the glow of candles flickering across polished tables. Yet Anna couldn't help but notice the quiet restraint of the Hales. Margaret no longer surveyed the room as though it belonged to her, and Edward's usual air of command had been replaced with silence. They shook hands, they smiled when addressed, but they no longer carried the confidence of conquerors. Instead, they carried the uneasy awareness that their power had been broken. Later that night, as the crowd began to thin and the music softened, Anna stepped outside onto the terrace. The air was cool, carrying the scent of roses and fresh-cut grass. She leaned against the railing, gazing at the reflection of the estate's lights shimmering on the lake. Jonathan joined her, his arms slipping around her waist. "You were incredible," he murmured. "I've never seen my parents back down like that." Anna allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't about winning, Jonathan. It was about showing them I couldn't be controlled. If they wanted a wife who would bow and sign away her life, they chose the wrong woman. He kissed her temple, a gesture both tender and solemn. "I'm proud of you. And I'm grateful you didn't walk away." Anna rested her head lightly against his shoulder. For the first time, she truly believed that he had chosen her over the weight of his family name. But her thoughts drifted back to Margaret and Edward. They had underestimated her, cornered her, tried to strip her of dignity with a single folder of paper. And yet, in the end, their scheme had only exposed their own weakness. Their arrogance had been their downfall. That was the justice she savored most. Not loud or dramatic, but quiet and undeniable. They would have to live with the knowledge that the woman they had tried to dismiss now stood above them, untouchable, her strength unshaken. Every polite smile they offered her from this day forward would be laced with that bitter truth. As the night drew to a close, Anna tightened her grip on Jonathan's hand. She wasn't naive enough to believe there would be no more challenges. Marriage, like life, was a series of trials and triumphs, but now she knew she could face them without fear. She had protected her legacy, defended her love, and claimed her rightful place. And in the quiet stillness of that moment, Anna Whitaker felt the sweet satisfaction of justice served.